Hi there. I'm like 3 years late to this conversation, but I thought I'd still make a video on the topic regardless. Firstly, what is UBI? Universal Basic Income is the idea that basically the government would send you a check each month with the idea that it would cover some base expenses that you may have. Now, the supposed benefits range from something as benign as more free time to curing erectile dysfunction. There are several models of how all of this could work, so let's take a look at why this generally isn't the best idea from a Marxist perspective. This is fundamentally a discussion of reformism instead of the far more attractive option. Nudge nudge. You can take a look at my Problems of the Western Left video for a deeper conversation in that area. With that said, let's get started. The problems. First of all, the presuppositions. The idea is that, with UBI, economic activity would be stimulated as people would spend more, would have base needs met so that they can pursue more gainful employment, would be able to start their own businesses and further grow the economy, ushering in higher living standards for all. Of course, this completely looks past the usual infinite growth on a finite planet issue, but we can ignore that for now. The more insidious quote-unquote benefit would be to replace supposedly bulky, bureaucratic social programs with UBI, which kind of reveals why a whole lot of billionaires are on board with the idea. In fact, this is the only major reason I can see common across that group. Hint, those people aren't looking out for your interests. But we'll talk about that in a second. A trial version of what UBI could look like was, for example, the stimulus checks people got as a response to the COVID issue. Interestingly, what happened with that money shines a small light on what a general UBI program could face. Some banks immediately jumped on the money people got, claiming that since these individuals have this or that debt, this money should go directly into paying that off before anything else. What's stopping a UBI system from basically being faced with the same issue in regards to rent, debts, mortgages, or anything else? What's stopping the UBI checks from hitting your account and then automatically transferring to pay off student debts set at extortionate interest rates? What's stopping all loans from raising interest rates to specifically capture this new money? Furthermore, we need to remember that we live in a market system. Nothing is stopping landlords, manufacturers, and basically everyone else from increasing prices to meet the sudden influx of several $100s in people's pockets. Rent is notoriously known for this, as landlords continuously tried to increase it during this pandemic, and if it wasn't for the emergency COVID laws put in place, we'd be seeing rent jump up roughly the amount of whatever you'd end up getting in the bank from Uncle Sam each month. There's already a drive for further austerity measures within the US and practically everywhere else. UBI, as it's currently being proposed, will just be another strategy towards that aim. That's why everyone, from Mises to Reagan, was in favor of differing flavors of UBI. Remember, UBI is scaled to cost a lot of money, even trillions by some estimates. If that'll be paid out, where does the budget of far more efficient programs like public healthcare go? If you're getting all this quote-unquote free money, the argument goes, why would you need universal healthcare or food stamps? Why would we need to build a decent public transportation system if you can just hire an Uber with that extra money? Why would you need unemployment benefits if you're already getting a check? To put it simply, UBI is a socialization of an expense that should be paid through taxation of massive corporations and the wealthiest individuals. Instead, planned forms of this usually are little more than thinly veiled attempts at reducing taxes on the absolute wealthiest and their companies by shifting that tax burden onto the working class through increased VAT taxes and other sneaky methods. So, raised prices, cut social spending, and reduce securities all for a lump sum at the end of the month that barely covers whatever is lost with all that austerity. Doesn't sound all that good to me, being fully honest. Furthermore, those who are vulnerable or who wouldn't be eligible for UBI, be they undocumented workers, prisoners, those with disabilities, or anyone else, would end up with the brunt of increased costs, social programs, and no UBI, or a heavily reduced total income, to offset the change. That's all assuming this money would grow with inflation year by year. Wages already don't, so what makes you think UBI would? Even if it would be pegged to inflation, you'd be naive to think this won't come along with the destruction of social programs as a dedicated goal of the ruling class. We live in a capitalist society, in which workers and capitalists stand in direct opposition in regards to their interests. Workers want full, dignified employment because that gives them all the power to agitate for whatever they demand. Capitalists want a reserve army of labor, a mass of unemployed so that if workers get rowdy, well, they'll just be fired and on to the next guy it goes. This keeps wages low, profits high, and workers desperate. A UBI that is significant enough to live off of without working would be good for the working class, as they'd be able to agitate for improvements through strikes, demonstrations, etc. without the fear of them going bankrupt if fired or otherwise. Musk, Bezos, and every other guy in that clique knows this, and that definitely isn't the UBI they're advocating for. They want a UBI that is just a sprinkling, so that workers would begrudgingly accept cuts to their pay. Their monthly UBI check wouldn't be enough to support them on strike or demonstrations, and they'd be forced to continue working under worse conditions. It's not actually an extra $1,000 in your pocket, it's $1,000 minus any benefits you already receive. A working class with significant unemployment has weak bargaining power, and a weak working class can easily be pushed around. UBI tends to be a way to shift discussion away from the acute structural changes that need to be made, let alone talks of improving wages, workplace safety standards, and increased democratic participation in the workplace. Now, the solutions. UBI isn't a bad idea on its own, but it needs to be contextualized. With rent freezes and price controls, a working class powerful enough to demand and maintain universal healthcare, access to education, unemployment benefits, etc., UBI would be a pretty great idea. But is the US working class capable of demanding, let alone achieving that much? Same goes for the working classes of many European countries, and that's not even mentioning those on the imperial periphery. UBI really represents something bigger than just a check every month. In it, there's hope that working people won't be so tight on money after rent, that they could possibly afford a doctor visit, that they could afford to eat healthier or to have more leisure time. In essence, UBI represents the subconscious demands of a beaten working class. Universal healthcare, rent control, accessible public transportation. Instead of agitating for things that would definitely improve the conditions of the working class without this quote-unquote free money, the ruling class tries to bamboozle you with a shitty band-aid onto an already broken system. UBI only makes sense in a system where the working class has already achieved those aims, which would directly protect and improve their lives. Within a capitalist society, UBI is a decent idea only with an already existing welfare net, not as a replacement of it, to the dismay of the Musks and Bezoses of the world. And if we lived in a society where the working class did wield that sort of power, one which we could force the top income brackets to pay their taxes and to fund UBI along with all the other social programs, why would we just stop at that? Why not take the whole thing over and have a system that would ensure the continuation of these progressive policies, rather than leave it to the whims of the capitalist class that will, the second they see a weakening of the labor movement, tear down all these concessions and revert us back to the system we had before, if not worse? And this is the crux of the matter. Prepare for me to sound like a broken record. Under capitalism, reformist means will, at best, result in concessions given to the working class to offset and diffuse revolutionary momentum. Concessions can always be taken away. The only way, and I repeat, the only way we can maintain the gains of the working class are, as history has shown, through revolution, through the seizing of political power and the means of production by the working class. You'll never get universal healthcare that won't slowly be stripped at the edges bit by bit, just like in the most shining of the European social democracies. You'll never get equal opportunities, as education will inevitably be barred to you through price or nepotistic allocation, just as we see happen within the richest country on earth, the United States. You'll never get guaranteed employment under capitalism. Instead, you'll get 39-hour contracts, gig economy nonsense, and other bullshit jobs that add little to nothing to your life. Instead, we can have a system in which we have full employment, in which everyone works 5 or 6 hours a day instead of 8, in which social surplus goes into funding universal healthcare and education, in which the elderly and disabled can be cared for in a dignified manner, all in a form that is guaranteed to stay. Even if there is more work to do, it'll go towards positive ends that directly benefit you and your community, rather than enriching a handful of people already unfathomably wealthy. Without political power, the working class has nothing. We end up being little more than pawns at the hands of employers, to be moved around and cast out whenever it suits profits best. All in a world being devoured by climate change, and talks of water wars and climate refugees already becoming more and more frequent. Systematic change is required, and that systematic change sadly won't come when the best we can hope and agitate for is a few $100s a month, as everything that maintains and secures our lives around us is stripped bare. TLDR, read Lenin, as always. And while you're at it, why not Luxembourg's Reform Revolution too? Sorry for ending on a more grim note than usual, but sometimes these things need to be said.